Hi, Peter Charles here, and today let's talk about camera reviews. And I apologize, it's going to be a little bit of a rant, but I have some issues with the quality of the types of camera reviews that are out there because it ended up costing me money recently. So we'll talk about it. Well, if you've been following my channel, you know about my problems with the Sony ZV-E10. I wasn't a happy camper with it. Now, I'm not going to go through the problems all over again. That's a waste of time. But the thing about that is I went through a bunch of both written and video reviews on that camera. And the things that really bothered me about the camera were never covered. So, or there was one line, if I remember correctly, on one written review that remarked about the lack of a command dial. That was it. So the things that would have made a difference in my decision were never covered. So I thought to myself, what are the kind of reviews out there? And why didn't I really catch on? Well, you've got the kind of review that's basically a specification list review. Now, if you've read the specification list for the camera, you don't need to listen to that video or read that article. But I appreciate the fact there are people out there that will never read a specification list. So those videos and articles are useful. But a perfect example of why they can get irritating though, here we got an X100, Fujifilm X100. It's known as a street camera. It can do some other jobs as well, but it's a stills camera. It's got a traditional control layout. You know, you don't buy this as a video camera. So why spend 5 minutes in a review talking about its video capabilities? All you have to mention is it can do video. That's about it. Because you're wasting your time going over the video specifications because nobody's going to buy it for a video camera. That's different when we're talking about an XH2 hybrid camera. Video is very important. We're going to use this for video. So you have to cover the video, obviously. So this is the type of thing I'm talking about. The rote reviewing of specs that are unimportant to the people who are likely going to use it or the types of uses you'll put this camera to. So that's one thing, the specification review. I read the spec list. It's a waste of time me doing that. Then we get kind of like, I hate to call them the fanboy reviews, but they really gush over certain aspects of the camera. And, you know, they leave a lot of things undone or unsaid. So I've been thinking about what kind of review would I want? Because I'm not going to whine about reviews without, saying what could we be doing. Well, let's take a camera like the X100 or that Sony ZV-E10. You've got to think about the target market for the camera and you've got to pitch your review to that. But you also have to look at some of the other uses. And that's where the Sony review was missing. It didn't cover some of the other things. So with this, if you're going to do a review on this camera, obviously you do it for street, but you might do it for travel, as a family camera, as a walk around everyday camera. The types of things we used to use this style of camera for back in the old film days. So you might want to talk about that. With this camera, you could get into an extremely long review if you went in through a specs list approach. So you'd have to think about how the camera is going to be used both in video and in stills and concentrate on some key areas and basically talk about the functionality of this camera. For example, the autofocus in the, after a few firmware reviews went to pot on this camera and now it's back with the latest firmware. But, you want to get into those details if you are talking about this camera today. You're going to have to talk about that issue and deal with it. So you're dealing with the problem issues. The other thing that gets me is you've got to talk about ramifications of a particular feature or lack of a feature in a camera. A perfect example on that Sony was that it wasn't a very good film camera. So if you planned on using as a everyday vacation camera, you're going to have to point out how you're going to have to use that camera to make it productive in that kind of still photography environment. In other words, slap it on full auto and just use it that way. If we're talking about, for example, the digital stabilization, which is really necessary on that camera to get good stable video when you're walking. So, and it comes with a very healthy crop. If I remember correctly, it's about 1.44 crop. So the ramifications of that is if you're going to use it for vlogging and you're going to turn on the digital stabilization to get really smooth results, you're going to have to buy another lens. You're going to have to look at buying the 10-20 to get a wide enough angle for vlogging and still use the digital OIS. Nobody talks about the fact that if you buy that camera, you're going to be looking at buying another lens if you use either the 4K 30p or the digital stabilization. So they can say, oh yes, there's a crop, but what's that crop mean? If you're a vlogger, it means you're buying another lens. That's the ramifications. So this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about a lack of a feature, or sometimes you get silly comments like I saw one about the XM5 whining about the fact it didn't have a viewfinder and didn't have stabilization in the body. Well, if you want image stabilization and a viewfinder, well, and a bigger battery, you better go buy an XT5. I mean, the XM5 is not an XT5. It's a different kind of camera. So it's not going to have a viewfinder. So whining about not having a viewfinder is pointless. Because there are other cameras that are very similar, but they have viewfinders. So if you want those, go buy it. But the XM5 comes with the articulated screen, which makes the lack of a viewfinder less of an issue. So you'll see, I mean, concentrating on the wrong things in some of the reviews, like video and with the X100, or getting into a long specification list and then, to top it off, failing to talk about the ramifications of a particular specification, or lack of a specification, whatever it is. So to wrap this up, I'd like to see reviews that concentrate on the main strengths and weaknesses of the camera, looking at the target market, also looking at other potential uses. And when you're dealing with a weakness or maybe even a benefit, talk about the ramifications. As an example, digital stabilization means a wider lens. 4K with a crop means a wider lens. So you have to invest in another lens. Those kinds of ramifications makes the review far more meaningful for somebody who's looking to buy that camera. And they can say, yeah, I don't want to go buy another lens, and I don't want that crop factor, so perhaps I should look for a camera that doesn't have that crop factor or has internal stabilization. So those are the things that get on my nerves. The spec list and the fanboy type reviews, they end up being a waste of time, really, especially if you already know the spec list. So there's my rant on a damp, nasty day. I haven't had a glass of wine yet. Too full from Christmas. So, yeah, I guess it's a good time for a rant. Anyway, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and let's have some better reviews out there. Cheers.